Welcome to One Sharp Sword, cutting through to what matters most. I'm your host, Dr. P, Dr. Wayne Pernell, the exponential success coach and the president of Dynamic Leader Inc. Today, oh my goodness, I was really excited to connect with our guest. She has a PhD from Cambridge. She's done all kinds of organization development work. She is a leadership consultant and a specialist in the area of respect. And the name of her company is like very dear to me because I'm such a huge fan. You guys know this about me, of curiosity. I'm so much a fan of curiosity. I keep a Curious George on my desk just to remind me to stay curious. So how do you engage more greatly in respect of yourself and of others? And how do you think differently about respect and inclusion? And how do you leverage curiosity? Let's find out. Julie Pham, Dr. Julie Pham. I was teasing. She's like, "Hello, Dr. P," and it's like, "Well, hello, other Dr. P."
Hi, Dr.
Dr. Julie
P.
Pham, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me on, Dr. P.
You are welcome, Dr. P. That's so funny. There's an old movie, Doctor. Anyway, there you go. I'm so excited to get into this. The whole idea of respect, your PhD in the social sciences that helped you leverage this. I want to know, like, you didn't land in this space of, ta-da, I'm this amazing doctor who knows all about respect. So you grew up where?
Yes. I mean, Dr. P, there are lots of pivots and career changes for me to get
Right?
to where I am. So I grew up in the Pacific Northwest in Seattle, and I was born in Vietnam. And so that's actually a really important part of my story, if you don't mind me sharing this.
I want you to share this.
Yes.
Absolutely, please.
So I was born in Vietnam. I came to the US as a boat person with my parents when I was 2 months old. And this was in 1979. My father had just been put in a communist re-education camp for 3 years after the war ended. And so we grew up in Seattle. I grew up in Seattle, and my parents founded the first privately owned Vietnamese language newspaper in the Pacific Northwest.
Wow.
Yeah, and that's important because I think there are so many different ways that people come to this country and why, and for us, it was really for freedom, and that's been a really big theme in my life. I think of my parents as hustlers among hustlers because the Vietnamese community here is very entrepreneurial. And whenever I get scared, I just think about my parents' journey and escaping by boat. And so that's where I get a lot of my inspiration and source of courage.
You know, I just want to pause right there because so many of us were able to just start on a path, and we've had our struggles. Some have had it easier, some have had it tougher, but there was sort of a path. We got on a path, and this is sort of what I want to do, and kind of inch by inch stepping into it. And we take for granted that there is a path. And your parents and there's such a different start that not everybody had a path that was especially easy, that to escape a country in order to reach a place of freedom. I just like to underscore that it's like, we take so much for granted, and that to go back to land in that space, it's like amazing that your parents did what they did, what fortitude. And so how you must have grown up knowing that they were, like, knowing without the words to go with it, when you grew up, you came over at 2 months old, and they're starting a newspaper in a Vietnamese community. I'm guessing English wasn't necessarily an
No,
easy
I mean,
thing.
limited English. I
Yeah.
mean, both my parents, since my father served as an officer, he did speak English, but it was hard. It was still very hard. And then I two younger brothers soon followed.
Wow.
and
Yeah.
my mom had to drop out of school because they both started going to school again because their degrees weren't recognized here, and so they had to start again. And so it was really starting a new life.
It is a new life. So you were born into a family of strivers, not just survivors, but thrivers. I mean, there's a difference, to land somewhere that's totally foreign and just survive, just get by. And in my thinking, survival is kind of a dis-ease, right? Your parents took it, figured it out, struggled through it. Struggle gives you growth. Struggle, not suffer, right? And I'm a big language person, so
Yes, absolutely. My parents always taught me that being a refugee is something to be proud of. I think a
yeah,
lot of times people think, "Oh, refugee, oh, you've suffered so much, and we have to help refugees." And my parents always taught me, "No, refugees, that means that we're resilient. We are thrivers, and and that we can make a lot with what we have." And so that I'm really proud of our community and how creative and resourceful. I mean, I definitely think that the Vietnamese community has punched above its weight class for its
yeah,
size.
agreed. I'm writing these down because I want to point out some of the words again that are so potent, right? That if any of us, it's just like wake up from where you are and take on any of these words. Resilient, thrive, creative, resourceful. Like, where can you incorporate any of our listeners, right? Any of our audience? Where can you incorporate any of those words today in your life to up level your life just that bit?
And wait, I'll give you
Resilient,
another word:
thrive.
hopeful.
Oh, very good. Resilient.
Hopeful and optimistic. I think that I read somewhere that Vietnamese are among the most optimistic people in the world, and I really believe that because I think that there's resilience and hopeful is different, right? To believe that hopeful and optimistic are different from just resilient. So,
That's amazing. I just saw something about hope, and was reminded of an early study in the 1960s, and it was a pretty horrible study with rats, where they basically put rats in water and watched how long they would swim, and the average at the first test was 16 minutes, um, before they sort of started to give up. And at that point, they were plucked from the water, dried off, and then put back in the water. And it's like,
mm,
that's a mean thing to do. That
mm,
said, what we learned was these rats didn't go 16 minutes at that point.
mm.
They went 60 hours. And the whole idea is
Wow,
the whole
so
idea is
fascinating.
when, right, even rats, when they're given a bit of hope that they might be, there might be a way through this. The whole idea is with hope, you can go and go and go. Again, I mean, in the 1960s, there was a whole lot of stuff done that, may or may not be done today. But we learned a lot. So hopeful, optimistic, amazing words. I'm like, there's so much I want to get out of you. So talk more about your journey and then how you got to do what you're doing now.
Yeah, so being immigrants, my parents wanted me to have a very stable life because they didn't have that stable life, and so wanted me to be a doctor or a lawyer. I thought I was going to be a lawyer, and instead I decided that I was going to pursue academia, and I ended up getting my PhD in history, and so I spent most of my 20s actually pursuing
Where?
that degree
Don't just,
at Cambridge,
there you
in
go.
the UK, and so during that time, I got to live in the UK, in Germany, in France, and in Vietnam. And so that really has shaped the way that I think about how people want to be treated, how we interact, how we change in different settings. And then I came back to Seattle actually in 2008 because actually as I was finishing up my dissertation, I realized, oh, I don't want to do this. I don't want to stay in academia. And Dr. P had done all the things that academics are supposed to do. Right? I published in peer-reviewed journals. I taught. I actually went back to Berkeley to teach for a semester. I was working at an academic journal. And so I'd done all the things. And yet I realized I didn't want to stay in academia. And I actually wanted to try my hand at business. And my brother, who was working at the newspaper, said, "Hey, can you come back and help out?" And so I decided to come back. But I didn't realize I was coming into the Great Recession. And we were also the global decline of the newspaper industry. And
Oh
so I
man.
came at the end of 2008 and the
Oh,
world had changed.
oh,
I didn't,
2008,
oh,
everything like just
everything had changed, right?
yeah.
Everything had changed. All these newspapers were closing down across the country. And here I was working at a Vietnamese newspaper with my parents. And I learned so much. I call that period the time of my real life MBA. And I started to do a lot of volunteering. And I went from being a solitary researcher to collaborating with others. And that transition was very hard. It was very, very hard for me. And I got to say that I wasn't very curious at the time. I was just very much, let's get this done. Why is it taking so long? Why are we chit chatting?
Mm,
And it was incredibly frustrating for me. And I realized I wasn't having fun. I wasn't having fun and other people were having fun. And so there were all these mistakes that I made. And, and then I just started to get mentors who really stressed relationship building. My father was also this too. It was just like really stressed relationship building. And I realized how much fun it could be learning from other people. Actually, and that and then over time I started doing all this community organizing because also being someone who's bilingual in the role that I had, people kind of just turned to me and said, "Oh, you can represent these marginalized communities," and so that's how I mean, I feel like running the newspaper with my brother, writing our first business plan. We actually bought half the newspaper from my parents. That was the business education. That's how I learned how to sell. That's how I learned how to do marketing, distribution, operations. And yet the community building part was really where I learned all those communication skills. And that's where I realized again, kind of seeing again, even if it was in a much more local context, people have different ideas of how we want to be treated. And then fast forward, so I was at the newspaper for 3 years, realized I'm working with 8 people, half of them have the same last name as me. I need to move to a bigger organization. And then I spent the next 9 years in tech. And at different tech companies going corporate. And then the last one, I was an executive at a nonprofit advocating on behalf of the tech industry. And that's where I got my second real life PhD. And I kind of started to do community building again. And I created a program to bring together people from tech, government, and community-based organizations. I started doing cross-sector work. So before, when I was at the newspaper, I was bringing people together from very different ethnicities and different races. And this time it was from different sectors. And the same differences would come up. And what I saw, though, was that I saw some people thrive and some people struggle. Because in this volunteer program I created, and the people who were struggling were those who were saying, "I want success to look like this. This is what the outcome needs to look like." And Dr. P, inevitably things change, right? And they were really struggling with that. And then the people who were really thriving were just, "Oh my gosh, look at what I learned. I had no idea. We created something out of nothing. This is so cool." And it took me about a year and a half before I realized, oh, it's curiosity.
mm,
That's what it is. And something else we saw was that because people were placed into these cross-sector teams, if we had a critical mass of people who were curious on a team, they could actually uplift the morale. And the inverse was true as well. If we had a critical mass of people who are just so focused on the outcome, they could actually take down the morale of the team because there were a lot of people who were kind of in the middle. They were just in the middle. And so in the beginning, I really wanted to please and make the people who were struggling happy. It's like, come
yeah.
on,
Mm,
come on, let me let me like make this a good experience for you. And what I didn't realize was happening was I was losing the people who wanted to be there because I was so focused on saving those who actually were just, no, I want it to look like this. And then I learned to ask this one question. Once I started to suspect people were just kind of getting disengaged, I asked, do you think you can learn from other people here?
Wow. Good one. Good one.
And some of them said, straight up said no. Others said, I don't know. One person actually said, well, yes, but it'll take me too long because I'm much further along. And I learned to, once I heard that, I learned to say, okay, thank you. Don't worry. You don't have to replace yourself. We had this rule, you'd have to replace yourself if you dropped. We will find a replacement. And once we did, we replaced them with someone who did want to learn from other people. We could see the morale on those teams bounce up. And so that's where I was just, oh, this is what I want to do. And I mean, that, that natural researcher, right, in me, I was kind of like, for the 3 years I was running this, I was just, oh, what are we learning? And by the end, I was like, I want to do this, and I want to do this with other people too, because imagine what happens if we do this with people who are paid to work together. And that was the start of my company, Curiosity Based.
CuriosityBased.com.
Yes.
Just throw it out there now. Do you think you can learn from other people? It's a great question, and I'm struck by so much of what you're saying. It's one of the reasons I wanted you on is there's a congruence. I love your message. I love everything about that. I'll reference a TEDx that I did, which says how a parallax perspective can disrupt perceptual bias. And it's a fancy way of saying, if you look at something differently, you will interrupt your own blind spots about that thing that you're looking at. The bottom line is I ask people to make one assumption only one assumption, and that is that there's more, and that you ask yourself what you might be missing about the situation, the other person, or yourself. And I believe that's so congruent with what you're doing and how you're bringing this out. And you're saying, actually, respect comes from curiosity, like respect for yourself and for the other person, and maybe the process. And it doesn't mean that none of that can change. It means that we need to actually be in it and respect it in order for it to change and grow. Right? Yeah. So good.
You are bigger than the life you are leading. It really is time to attend to that thing you've wanted to do or have, but you've been putting off. It's time to step into that dream you've parked for someday. It's time to claim true well-being, both personally and professionally, without giving up the success that got you here. It's time to check out Dr. Pernell's signature small group retreat, the Exponential Success Summit. Explore exponentialsuccesssummit.com. Seats are extremely limited as this is a very special small group event. www.exponentialsuccesssummit.com.
So these days, you're working on how do you bring this message out besides you're doing some writing, you're doing some consulting? How do you where and how is this showing up for you?
So so Dr. P brought up respect. And so I wrote this book last year called 7 Forms of Respect. And I actually think of this as a tool to spark curiosity and to get people to practice curiosity with one another. And actually, I was a year into my business before I realized I shifted the way that I was thinking about curiosity. I had always thought about it as something you have or something you are, right? An adjective or a noun. And now I actually think of it as something as a do. And so I think of it as a practice. And in that way, when I think about it that way, it's just, oh, there are times where I'm actually not practicing curiosity. And that's real, right? I'm not open-minded right now. I do not. I'm disappointed. and I'm frustrated with my disappointment. I had certain expectations, and I am not feeling very curious right now. Right? I don't want to listen to the other person.
Right.
Or sometimes I'm listening, and I'm going to be straight up. Sometimes I'm listening. I'm listening to see how I can convince you that I am right. And
Yeah.
so I think it's actually really powerful when we admit that we are not always curious. And
I
then that
love that.
actually,
Yeah.
it actually takes it away from being, oh, they're curious people and they're not curious people, right? Actually, it just means that I think that we are all curious, and yet there are times where I'm not practicing curiosity, and
I think
there,
it's really
yeah,
important. I think this goes hand in hand with what I said about my TEDx. Like, we
hmm
do have perceptual bias.
hmm
We come to every situation with a preconceived notion, whether we know it or not.
hmm
And so curiosity as a do, right, as a verb, I think that's really important. One of the I have two sayings. One
hmm
is stay curious, right? It's
hmm
one of the ways that I sign off some of my notes to people. It's also again, it's an action verb, right?
hmm
It's an action word. The other is one of my sayings is, if you live in curiosity, you cannot be in judgment.
hmm hmm
Right. So the whole idea is step into it. If you notice, as you were saying, that if you're noticing yourself being in this judgmental place, it is an action step shift. Get
hmm
into this space of curiosity. What am I missing? What might the other person be saying from what perspective? What's the other person feeling even, right? So how do you encourage or engage, or can we talk about the seven forms of respect?
yeah. And so I'll just say that when I think about the practice of curiosity, I actually liken it to meditation. So it looks really easy, and yet it's quite hard. And we can't always stay in a meditative state. So actually, I would take a spin on saying, stay curious. It's like we can't actually always stay curious because judgment, us having judgy thoughts, is then the opposite of that is us being open, right? So for us to actually even appreciate being open, there are times where I'm going to be judgy. Oh, I'm being judgy. And so it's about how we move back and forth between these,
Love
and
that.
realize that because there are so many, I think of expectations and assumptions. I like to compare them to those nesting dolls, those Russian nesting dolls,
Sure.
right? It's just like, I didn't even know I had this. I've got this assumption. Then I peel it off. I'm like, oh my gosh, there's another one, right? And so let's go to comparing this to, or how did this relate to the seven forms of respect? First, though, I want to say that I think of the practice of curiosity, there are three elements. The first is self-awareness. The second is relationship building. And the third is clear communication. So let me go step by step here. The first, self-awareness, is how do I practice curiosity on myself? How do I ask myself questions? And as that relates to respect is, how do I want to be respected and why? What matters to me? The second one is relationship building. So that's, how do I practice curiosity with other people? How do I ask Dr. P, hey, how do you want to be respected? And you know what I also need to do? It's not just about learning about you. It's also me sharing myself with you, right? So then and letting you get curious about me, because some people almost are, it's an offensive move to just, I'm going to ask you all these questions and not share anything about me. Right. And yet we need to have that back and forth, that reciprocity, to have the relationship building. So how do I learn about how other people get curious about how other people want to get respect? And also, how do I share with them my stories so that they can react to that? And I'm going to learn about me just by how you reacted to it, because we're going to spark things in each other. And then third element is clear communication. So this is, how do I listen to understand? How do I ask questions when I don't understand? And how do I share stories? I find that a lot of times people are very vague, and they speak in abstract. So when we talk about, for example, I can say, oh, what's important to you? What are the forms of respect that are important to you? Why? Oh, you said punctuality is important to you. Why is that? Well, because it's respectful. Well, why do you find it respectful? Because it is. That's what you do. It's respectful, right? And what I'm really asking them to share is like, well, what do you think in your life influenced you to think about that? To think that punctuality is respectful. I can share a story right now to illustrate. My mom, growing up, my mom was always late picking me up from school. So the school staff had to wait with me, and I felt a lot of anxiety because the school staff had to wait with me. And I
And
said, well,
shame, probably.
and shame,
Yeah.
right? And because they couldn't go home until I got picked up. And so growing up, when I grew up, I was like, I'm not going to do that. And I literally, around time, I feel anxiety. That 5-year-old comes back,
Yeah.
right? It's not just, it's the proper thing to do. It's because we should do it. It's actually this story, this experience. And here's the thing, Dr. P, someone else could have the exact same experience and have a different reaction, right?
Exactly.
They could be like, I'm almost late. What's the big deal? Not a problem. And so
party doesn't start till I get here, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
And both are valid. It's like what the important thing is actually understanding, why do I think this way? How did I get here?
Yeah.
Because one of the biggest misconceptions actually about the 7 forms of respect is that we need to have all 7 forms. I tell people this is more like 5 love languages, not like 7 habits of highly effective people. It's actually the 7 forms of respect is for us to get curious, for us to practice curiosity around the forms of respect that I like to give and that I like to get, and to practice that curiosity with other people too, because actually what we found is that respect it's dynamic.
It is dynamic.
It's
And that's
dynamic.
where it's where personal growth comes from,
Mm-hmm.
right? You are not who you were 5 years ago, 20 years ago, certainly 5 years ago, even yesterday. If you acknowledge that you were curious about something, learned it, and might have grown as a result of what you learned even yesterday, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it is absolutely dynamic. It's interpersonally dynamic. It's independently, personally, singularly personal dynamic. I think it's awesome. Cool. So that's one of the 7, right?
Oh, so yes, I can share the other 7. I actually even have a bookmark here. So we use this acronym called PICCA, PPICCAA, and it stands for procedure, punctuality, information, candor, consideration, acknowledgement, and attention. And so the point here is that there are going to be some that I prioritize, and there are going to be others that I don't prioritize. And I've talked about how respect is dynamic, and that's because of these 3 dimensions. The first dimension is hierarchy. It's about power, especially in the workplace. There are going to be people who have more power, equal power, and less power than me. And who I'm interacting with in those power dynamics will influence how I think about respect. Yeah.
Well, so there's positional power.
Mm-hmm. And then there's informal power. Mm-hmm.
Correct.
Yes. And
do you go into that in your book?
Yes, and that like you can have one person, you can I can be in a relationship with someone in this setting, you have more power than me, but in another setting, I have more power than you.
Mm-hmm.
Right, and so it does.
That's part of the dynamic.
Yeah, it's part of it's awesome. Dynamic. And then the second dimension is what I call give versus get. So the way we like to give respect can differ from the way we like to get respect. And so some people feel, am I being a hypocrite? No, we're just contradictory, and humans are contradictory. And this could also depend on that power dynamic, right? Because it's like, well, I'm not always going to give the thing I give to my boss will probably be different from what I give to my peer and what I give to someone who reports to me. If I'm a solopreneur, what I do, let's face it, if I have to choose being late to a meeting with my customer versus my vendor, I'm going to be late to a meeting with my vendor, right? That's just the reality. And then the third dimension is this question of what matters to you. What matters to you? And that is versus what should matter to you. Because we've all been socialized to think, this is what respect should look like. This is what I should get. And what we don't ask ourselves is, what actually matters to me so much, I will do it no matter what, even if it doesn't matter to the other person. And I feel it inside. And maybe it's something embarrassing. Like, I don't want to admit it matters to me because I feel it shouldn't matter to me. And yet that can catch up to us as well.
This is great. This is all, again, I appreciate having you. It is aligned very much with a lot of the things that I teach, the stories that we take on early on, even pre-verbally, before we have a broad perspective and a context for what rules we've sort of ingrained in us, and then we apply those as we get older, and they only served us when we were little. Right. And so, but we take these on and we've built this story, and the whole story around punctuality. Right now, it still serves you. It doesn't have to, and it does, which is great, as long as you know there's no shame involved, right? That's a choice at this point.
And it's also, when I'm in Vietnam, though, that changes, because punctuality, they have this phrase in Vietnam, time is rubber. And so I had to adjust, right, to the setting. And so I actually have when I started this research, I'd ask people, hey, how do you want to be treated? And people would say, with respect. I'm like, okay, well, what does respect mean to you? And then they'd say, well, it's the golden rule. So Dr. P, you know the golden rule.
So I was going to ask you about this, because you're like, because you have a thing where it's like, say goodbye to the golden rule.
Yes.
Say hello to the rubber band rule. So golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And you're like, no, do unto others as they wish to be done.
No. I don't even have that. That's the platinum rule.
Okay.
The platinum rule is do unto treat people the way they want to be treated. Now, the issue with the platinum rule, because it sounds really good, right? Treat people the way they want to be treated. Well, what if they don't know? What if they don't tell you? What if it changes? And what if you don't want to treat them that way?
Okay.
Maybe they're asking you for something that you don't want to do. And so I actually have what I call the rubber band rule.
So tell me about the rubber band.
The rubber band rule.
Yeah. So for our listening audience, Dr. Julie Pham, she is holding up a rubber band and ready to
and then stretching it. Right. Okay. Exactly. And stretching it. So the rubber band rule actually reflects that we're able to stretch. As humans, we're stretchy, right? She's like, oh, Dr. P, I know you like this. I'm kind of ambivalent, but I'll do it, because I want to respect you. I want to show respect to you. And I know that matters to you. So let's say we're in groups where it's just, oh gosh, I've heard sometimes that in work settings, I'm at a place where everyone gives each other compliments all the time. Everyone is awesome, and there's all these kudos all the time. And so I feel like I have to do that. I have to say everyone's awesome, even though I think that's superficial, right? And so what can happen though over time is we're stretching to kind of accommodate what we think other people want. We stretch. Until we snap and break.
Yeah, it breaks.
Yeah. And so the rubber band
was bold, because that might have hurt. So that was awesome.
Luckily it's not too thick of a rubber band. But so with the rubber band rule, it's actually about knowing, what are my breaking points? What's going to make me snap? And that's different for everyone. And a lot of times this is that first element of practicing curiosity, is practice curiosity in yourself. Understand what matters to me and why. A lot of people, when people feel disrespected, when I feel disrespected, my first impulse is they meant that. They're the person. They're the problem. They meant to do that to me. And what we're not asking is, why do I feel bad? Why do I feel disrespected? Why is this bothering me? We're so focused on what the other person did. And I'm so guilty of this. I've gone around like, I can't believe they did that. How could they possibly think that was okay? And I'm not asking myself, my first reaction is not, again, I'm not practicing curiosity all the time.
This is trained. This is, if you start to feel something that has you just storming inside, it is a trained response to say, what is it about that action that caused this response in me? What is it about me that's responding this way to that action? Because they're not thinking about it anymore, right? That's the whole thing. When you're angry, when you're carrying a grudge, you're the one that's still wrapped up in something. They're long gone. They're beyond it. So, yeah.
But Dr. P, I'm not gonna lie. Like, sometimes it takes me a while to get there, right? Even though I know that's where I need to get. And like, sometimes I'm just stewing in my feelings. I just had this a major argument with my mom over the weekend, right? And I stewed, even though I knew, yes, logically, I need to ask myself these questions, but I was angry. And so that prevented me from practicing curiosity, because those emotions are going to happen.
It takes energy. I will say that I'm pretty good at it now. Like if I'm feeling something, it's almost instant for me. Like that has become an internal trigger
Mhm.
that it's like, well, wow, that's a big shift for
Mhm.
me. Here's what's great is that like you are in the process, you are doing this on a regular basis as the expert. You're even catching yourself going, why is this affecting me? For me, I've been doing this a really long time, and there is a training. I mean, it's a part of a process, and it is now almost natural. It's uncomfortable, and it's natural to go, okay, I've got this intense feeling.
Mhm.
I'm choosing not to be sucked into this intense feeling. What's going on in this situation that I am choosing, right? And that's part of it. I'm choosing to react this way. So if I'm in charge of my emotions, I'm choosing this reaction. What's happening that I'm responding in this way or reacting in this way? And what do I choose? How do I now choose to respond? Because if something's triggered me, it's an integrity breach from an old story. What happened?
Mhm.
And so I'll explore, and then I'll explore, and then I'll be able to step back into the situation from a much more neutral place with respect for myself, the situation, and the other person. So
Mhm.
yeah, it's a big process. So I love the rubber band rule, right? In a nutshell, this is what's going in my show notes, unless you want something different.
No.
One,
Mhm.
be flexible, and two, know your limits.
Mhm.
Like those are the two
Yeah.
rules of the rubber band rule.
Yeah. Know your breaking points. Know what's going to make you snap. And know that that's different for everyone. Some people are big, loose rubber bands, and other people are, I'm a tight little rubber band, right? And that could also
Yeah.
depend on the context. For some people, maybe they're super loose at home and really tight at work, right? And it's kind of just understanding that the conditions, our environment, who we're interacting with, will impact that. And also just that I do think that just like crying can help us, right? It's like sometimes we just feel the swell of emotions, and I have just got to cry, right? I can't just be, no, Julie, don't feel sad. Why are you feeling sad? No, I'm like, I just need to cry, or I just need to vent, or I just need to be
Be
angry.
in it.
And
Yeah, be
then,
in
and
it. Like
then,
there's no bad
yeah,
That's the other
yeah,
thing, is there's no
yeah.
bad emotion. It's in some ways it's information for you, your body, like you're a whole person.
Hmm.
There's no that it's like, but seek to understand it.
Hmm. Hmm.
Like, and then
Yeah.
go ahead and be in it.
Yes. And because we need to be able to articulate that for ourselves before we
Yeah.
can go and talk to that person. That's the thing. I think sometimes we go and we expect the other person to know, and we haven't even explained it to ourselves. Why are we upset? We think obviously they'll understand why we're upset. And yet if asked, we're actually not able to explain it. And so that's why that practicing curiosity on ourselves first is
Right.
so
Because
key.
there's an old story it comes from.
Hmm. Hmm.
That's great. Yeah, that's right. It's curiosity, self-curiosity first. What's going on? What's happening that I'm experiencing this? Love all of this. That's great.
Hmm. Yeah, I
That's
think of it
great.
as like a lot of times people think about curiosity as being outward. I'm going to go learn this new thing. I'm going to pursue new knowledge. I'm going to learn about other people. I think of it as being both inward and outward.
Okay. That's amazing. Will you do me and my audience a favor?
Hmm.
Um, uh, you held up the bookmark and you ran through PPICCA like really fast,
Yes, yes.
and so just like give give each give me a second
Okay,
between each word at least, so it's like
okay,
the first P is what,
okay,
the
okay.
second P is what, right? So
So, yes, so there is the acronym PICA, PPICCAA, and there is procedure. So this is about us following established rules and norms. There's punctuality, which is about time constraints. This is not about valuing time, it's about honoring time constraints. And then there's information, and this is about giving people access to data, to knowledge that they don't need to necessarily know. I think of this as FYI. And then there's candor, and this is about giving. This is kind of like information, but the information is intended with a purpose to create change. So this could look like unsolicited or solicited feedback. there's consideration. And this is interacting with someone based on what you think that they want and need. So the best example of this is, oh, I'm going to surprise you, Dr. P, right? Because I want to delight you. I'm not going to ask you what you want. I'm just going to surprise you, right? Because that's the consideration. And then there's acknowledgement, which is gratitude, praise. And then there's attention, which is undivided, not multitasking, undivided attention, listening, not interrupting. And so for each of these, I really, really, really want to stress here, I'm not saying to have all 7. Because in some places, multitasking is a sign of performance, and that's okay. As long as people can say, this is what we prioritize. It's actually getting clear on what we prioritize rather than trying to be perfect and getting all 7.
Prioritization is another word in some ways for organizational values, right? So as an organization, whether that's a family or whether that is a large company or even a small company starting up, right? Your organizational values are about what do you choose to spend your time, attention, money on. That's how you know what your values are, right? So if you come together and it's like, we got to get this done, awesome. Obviously, you know that time and activity are values.
So. Well, and I will actually say, I think that because I draw a distinction between values and priorities, because values, it is something that never changes. That's something that's a constant. Priorities actually recognizes that there are different things that are happening here. And I normally would prioritize candor. So for example, hey, I'm having a deep conversation with you. And normally I'm all about punctuality, right? Like we got to end on time. And yet you're telling me this sad story and I'm just going to listen. I'm not going to look at my watch, even though inside I might be like, oh, I'm really late. But, I really want to give you my undivided attention. And so I'm going to prioritize attention in that setting, not punctuality. And so from an organizational point of view, though, what I try to get when I work with teams is to help them decide, hey, what are the top 2 to 3 that we are going to consistently on this team prioritize? Not saying that the other ones aren't important, not saying that we don't do the other ones, saying that push comes to shove, this is what we need to prioritize.
That's great. That's awesome. I have a different approach to values. So that they're not necessarily permanent. You have your primary values. Those are the ones that stick with you. There are also what are called peripheral values. Because if you look at who you were when you were 20 years old, you don't have the look at me kind of value. That over time we value who am I in the world to how do I gain stability, and then it's what's my legacy, how do I make a difference, and then as you get a little bit older it's like, okay, I need to create this legacy, and adventure now matters a whole lot more to me, and health and adventure, and you combine those. So over time our primary and our peripheral values certainly shift. That said, they are different by your definition, and I agree with you that by your definition, values are different from priorities. Although if your value is, I value the interpersonal connection, then your priority is going to be, you're telling me a story, I am absolutely engaged with you.
That's it. That's it.
Here with you.
The values will influence what you prioritize.
That's so good.
That's a really great way of putting it. And I will say one thing that people get really frustrated by, some people are really frustrated by the 7 forms of respect in that it's so fluid. It's like, well, how are things so dynamic? Like I want answers.
right? It's right. Like, how are things not?
I want this. I want to know. And I always have to, I think that the 7 forms of respect is complementary to those personality assessments. But sometimes people are just, oh, well, I want to know which ones I always like, what are my respect styles and what are other people's respect styles? And it's just, well, we can talk about what we generally prefer. And yet that's not going to always be the case because situations change. And we also have to think about the situation.
Yeah. So preference, what I do with preference is, if you fold your hands in a certain way, if you bring your fingers together, a thumb will be on top, a finger bottom. That's a preference. On the other hand, when a situation requires it, you can close your hand the other way. It feels a little awkward, but it's certainly doable. And then once that situation's over, you'll probably go back to your preferred style. So if you clasp your hands and interlace your fingers, you'll feel it. I'm saying this for our listening audience, those that aren't viewing necessarily. And then, clasp your hands the other way with the other thumb on top. It's doable. Unless you're driving. Don't do it while you're driving. If you're listening,
we can stretch, right? We're capable.
Yeah, we can't. Exactly. We can't, right? We can live into a different style, even if it's temporary. So yeah, stretching, growing. It's so funny to me that you bring up that people are asking you, what is the way? And it's like, well, it's a dynamic way. Like, well, I want the answer. It's like, well, there's this thing called life. And it's kind of dynamic. It's what you make it for you. It's like if everybody had the same rule, it would be very boring. It's like
that. I mean, that is the lesson, right? It's just like that things change. And I actually had at the end of a talk once where I talked about asking questions, and this person said, "You've taught us how to ask questions. What I really want to know is how to answer questions." And I was just, that's life.
Yeah.
That's leadership. That's actually leadership. The question is, the big challenge is I can't tell you how to answer.
It goes back to something you said earlier, though. It's like, well, what matters to you now? What matters to you now? It's like, and your answer today might be different from your answer tomorrow or the next day. Like, it's like, I want to know how to answer questions. Well, what matters to you now?
Right, because that's going to change.
It will change.
Did I have an argument with my with someone I love this morning? Right? Did something break in the house? Is it really sunny outside and I'm just feeling really good? Like, all of those things impact how we're going to feel, and our ability to practice curiosity. Really,
it's right. So stepping back into that, how do I feel right now? What's the right answer? I don't know. What's the right answer? The right answer is, how do you feel in the moment when you're being asked that question? Whatever question it is. So good. So really good. All right. So it's curiositybased.com. What didn't we cover? Dr. Julie Pham. Julie.
Oh my gosh. There's so much we covered, but I'll just say one last thing very quickly. I think that there's a difference between disrespect and lack of respect.
Oh, so powerful.
So disrespect is intentional, right? So yes. Dr. P, I know you didn't like it and I did it anyway, right? And lack of respect.
It's a giant FU.
Yes, right? Because I know you didn't like, I know you like to be CC'd on emails and that's why I left you off, right? And yet lack of respect is, oh, I didn't know that mattered to you. And maybe you told me it wasn't a big deal. Right. And how often have we done that? Oh, it's not a big deal that you did that. It's not a big deal that you didn't do that. And yet inside we're seething. It's like, argh. And yet the other person didn't know. And so I think it's really important to pause when we're feeling disrespected. Again, it's totally normal to feel like when we don't get respect in the forms that we want, it's totally normal to feel disrespected. And yet to pause and ask, was this intentional? Or was this because they didn't know?
And either answer has a different response choice. Like asking that question puts you in a place of choosing to respond. If it was intentional, are you going to retaliate? I mean, that's a choice, but it's going to lead to again, consequences that you probably don't want. So if disrespect was intentional, how do you educate? Right?
Well, yeah.
And if lack of respect happened, which is unintentional, how do you educate?
And that goes back to the rubber band rule. I've got to articulate, tell someone what's going to make me snap. Right? Like part of that responsibility, the self-respect, is I need to be able to have respect for myself so that I can have that conversation with someone else, because I can't expect them just to know, especially if I've kind of been telling them otherwise. Oh, that's not a big deal. And yet it is a big deal to me. We have to take responsibility for what we communicate to other people.
You have to take responsibility for yourself and what you're sharing with other people about what you want for you. I'm loving this. Thank you for being here. This is awesome. How do people find you?
Thank you so much, Dr. P, for asking that. So you can find me, I'm most active on LinkedIn. So you can just find me at Julie Pham, PhD. And so please feel free to reach out to me, follow our company page, curiositybase.com. You can find more about the book at formsofrespect.com. You can buy it on Amazon and Barnes & Noble and all of those other bookstores. I also have tons of freebies on the site. So if you go to the site, you'll see this free quiz, this free digital course, a free mini book too. And our YouTube channel, also at Curiosity Base, has lots of different short videos. I talk a lot about the 7 forms of respect. I really, one day my dream is that people will talk about forms of respect the way we talk about love languages. That will say, hey, what's your form of respect? This is mine. No, and that way we move away from, I need you to respect me, I am respecting you, oh, we need to respect each other, to like, hey, how do we want to be respected? Because we could agree on what it feels like, we disagree on what it looks like. And I'd love to help people get to that. What does it look like for you?
Yeah, it's so personal, right?
Mm-hmm.
The idea of respect, it's so personal. Love that. All right, so Julie Pham, PhD on LinkedIn, curiositybased.com, and there's freebies and all kinds of stuff at curiositybased.com, plus the book, 7 Forms of Respect, Dr. Julie Pham. Yay. Thank you for being here, truly.
Thank you so much, Dr. P. I've really enjoyed this conversation.
I have too. It's great. My guest today, Dr. Julie Pham, 7 Forms of Respect, curiositybased.com. Please find her. And this is One Sharp Sword, cutting through to what matters most. I'm your host, Dr. P, Dr. Wayne Pernell, the Exponential Success Coach and the president of Dynamic Leader. We'll see you here again next time. Thanks for joining us.